Hi everyone, I am Karen Gallardo, and today we will tackle about the global city. So, to start our discussion, let me ask these questions to you. If you had a chance, would you move to New York or in Tokyo? How about in Seoul in South Korea? Maybe some of you will answer you want to move to New York or in Tokyo, Japan, or maybe in Seoul in South Korea, or maybe some of you already traveled in the cities. Or kung wala pa, perhaps nakadungog na mo sa mga stories about ani nga lugar and na mo yung mga idea since pwede raman kaayo nato ma-search sa internet ang mga information about ani nga mga lugar. But honestly, not all people have been to global cities, but most of us know about them. Their influence extends ever to one's imaginations. Now the question, what are these places? Unsa nga mga lugar ang makonsider as global cities? Why are they important? And how are they relevant to you? Okay, for you to understand more about the global city, John Francis will explain further on the next slide.
So now we might ask the question, what do we mean by global city? So by the definition of the Wikipedia, a global city is a city that serves as a primary node in the global economic network. So the concept originates from geography and urban studies based on the thesis that globalization has created a hierarchy of strategic geographic locations with varying degrees of influence over finance, trade, and culture worldwide. So in the year 1990s, sociologist Saskia Sassen popularized the term global city, with the criteria of identifying one is primarily based on economics. So, such as how progressive or how developed a certain place is. Saskia Sassen was able to produce books, and one of her books is named as The Global City. So, in that book, she initially identified three global cities. So, the first city is New York, second is London, and third is Tokyo. So, these cities is where we can assess that they are the core of the global finance and capitalism around the world. So, cities which can be considered as homes of the world's top stock exchanges. Now, but as time progressed, the criteria that Sassen used to determine what constitutes a global city have expanded. So we all know that some things don't stay as it is. So such cities may develop or degrade over time. So we must take note and take considerations the latest developments of a city. So examples of these aspects is in San Francisco City, which may factor as a global city as it is the home of the most powerful internet companies such as Facebook, Twitter, and Google. So lastly is the growth of the Chinese economy. So the growth of the Chinese economy has turned cities like Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangzhou into a center of great finance. So just a quick reminder, defining a global city can be complex. But one way to solve this dilemma is to go beyond the contrast of a global city and a non-global city. So instead of asking whether a city is a global city or a non-global city, we must ask in what ways are cities global and to what extent are cities global. Or we can just look up to such indicators that corresponds a global city. So the next of this topic is the indicators of a global city.
Good day everyone, my name is Christian Gabukan and we will talk about indicators for global city. So what are the attributes of global city? First is economic power. Okay, so this is what they said that Sassin remains correct in saying that economic power largely determines which cities are global. So they said Sassin based on economic aspects such as how progressive and how developed a certain place is. And then aya siya naka-idea nga, okay, this place can be considered as a global city. Second is the economic opportunities. Economic opportunities in a global city make it attractive to talents from across the world. So, since 1970s, many of the top IT programmers and engineers from Asia have moved to the San Francisco to become some of the key figures in Silicon Valley technology. So unsa man ang Silicon Valley? So ang Silicon Valley it serves as global center for high technology and innovation. So maong dagan kadto didto kay high-tech na kayo didto like advanced na bitaw. So maong daghan ka interest dito nga mga IT programmers ug engineers nga gikan sa Asia. Third is economic competitiveness. To measure the economic competitiveness of a city, the Economist Intelligence Unit has added other criteria like market size, purchasing power of citizens, size of the middle class, and potential for growth. And example is New York. And New York is have a largest stock market in the world, but Tokyo in Japan, it houses the most number of corporate headquarters. So, could you imagine nga 613 company headquarters ang nakabase sa Tokyo, Japan, and then 217 lang ang nasa New York, USA. Actually, New York and Tokyo are closest competitors. And another example is Shanghai sa China. Gamay ra ilang stock market compared to New York and Tokyo, but it plays a critical role in the global economic supply chain. Sugod nga ang China na ang center of manufacturing around the world. Kabantay mo sa mga product diri sa Philippines nga majority good is gikan sa China because China become the manufacturing center around the world. Most of the products manggod kay dadto ginahimo, di ba? Para sa nang kwan, namoy mapalit nga rice cooker or unsa pa na mga gamit ninyo sa balay, mga luwag nga mga baratohon ra bitaw. Mabantay gyud niyo sa ilang tag nga nay kwan made in China like nay uban mga sanina karon nga daghan na kayo ga panggawas kanang mga imit na lang ba nagi uban nga nay tag nga nay nakabutang nga made in China.
Next, center of authority. Global city are also center of authority. Washington, D.C. may not be as wealthy as New York, but it is the seat of American state power, and people around the world know its major landmarks. Example, White House, Capitol Building, Supreme Court, Lincoln Memorial, and Washington Monument. Compared with Sydney and Melbourne, is a sleepy town and not attractive to tourists, but as Australia political capital, it is home to the country top politician, bureaucrats, and policy advisory. Next is political influence. The cities that house major international organization may also be considered center of political influence. And the example is United Nations headquarters, and it can be found New York in USA, the European Union headquarters in Brazil, and Asian headquarters Jakarta in Indonesia, and European Central Bank Frankfurt in Germany. And lastly, the Center of High Learning and Culture. Finally, global city are center of higher learning and culture. A city intellectual influence is seen through the influence of its publishing industry, Example, many of the books that people read and publish in places like New York, London, and even Paris.
Hi, I'm Karen, and we will talk about why we should study global cities. Globalization is spatial, which means globalization is spatial because it occurs in physical spaces. More people are driven out of the city centers to make way of the new developments. So actually, you can see it when foreign investments move through a city and when companies build skyscrapers. So skyscrapers is kanang mga tagas na building like sa Manila, daghan di ba og mga tagas na building dito. And another one, people who are working in these businesses or Filipinos working abroad. They are they start to purchase high-rise condominiums and better homes kay 'di ba if makaipon nakasagara sa mga OFWs kay gaano naman na sila gapalit og mga condo or gapatukod sa og balay, gapalit og mga sakinan. Next is globalization is spatial because what makes it move is the fact that it is based in places. For example, again, Los Angeles. Ang Los Angeles is known as home of Hollywood. It is where movies are made for global consumption. Kay sila man ang movie-making mecca. Another one, the main headquarters of Sony is in Tokyo. So you're familiar man mo sa brand nga Sony, no? Na may phone nga Sony o other appliances. And from there, the company coordinates the sale of its various electronic goods to branches across the world. So, in other words, cities act on globalization and globalization acts on cities. So, pareho sila ga benefits. You have to take note that they are the sites as well as the mediums of globalization.
I'll share to you the challenges of global cities. First is the environmental threats. Rapid urbanization, which strains basic infrastructure, coupled with more frequent and extreme weather events linked to global climate change, is exacerbating the impact of environmental threats. This, for example, is the common environmental threats includes flooding, tropical cyclones, or to which coastal cities are particularly vulnerable, heat waves, and also in the epidemics. Then, owing the physical and population density of cities, such threats often result in both devastating financial loss and death. Making cities more resilient against these environmental threats is one of the biggest challenges faced by city authorities and requires urgent attention. Second is the resources. Cities need resources such as water, food, and energy to be viable. Urban sprawl reduces available water, catchment areas, agricultural lands, and increases demand for energy. While better application of technology can ensure more efficient transmission of electricity. Because many daghan kayong cities will continue to struggle to provide these resources to an ever-growing urban population. Beyond these basic requirements, haphazard growth will see the reduction of green spaces within cities, negatively affecting livability. As fresh water becomes scarce and fertile lands diminish, food prices may escalate, hitting the poorest hardest. So next and lastly is the inequality. When it comes to both the provision of basic resources and resilience against environmental threats, the forecast is uneven for different groups of urban inhabitants. As the number of urban super-rich grows, many cities will also see increased numbers of urban poor. The widening gap between the haves and have-nots will be accentuated in the megacities of the future, such as inequalities when left unchecked. Will destabilize society and unend any benefits of urban development. There is a critical need for policymakers to ensure that the fruits of progress are shared equitable.
Good day, everyone. I'm Herlin Gonzalez Ipanto. So, moving on to the challenges. So, what are the challenges of global cities? Global cities also have their undersides. They can be sites of great inequality and poverty, and as well as the tremendous violence. Like the broader process of the globalizations, global cities also create a winners and losers. So, like our concept, global north and global south, there is an inequality. There have a gap between the rich country and the poor country. And denser settlements patterns yield energy savings. So what do we mean by denser? If we say denser, it means compact or crowded o masisikip. So kapag masisikip ang settlement, may advantage pala siya dahil nakakapag-yield siya ng energy savings. Therefore, crowded settlement gives a energy savings. Like, for example, a apartment building. 'Di ba? Mostly of the apartment masisikip lang, but then they have the advantage because of the setup because it's more efficient to heat and cool unlike suburban house. So what do we mean by suburban house? We can associate suburban houses, we can associate a suburban houses to residential houses like subdivisions, maluluwag o malawak ang place unlike for the apartment na ang sikip-sikip. In cities with extensive public transportation system, people tend to drive less and thereby cut the carbon's emissions. So, the good example of this one is New York. Why New York? Kasi sa dami ng train transportation system sa New York, mababa lang ang kanilang carbon footprint. So what do we mean by carbon footprint? So when we say carbon footprint, it is the total greenhouse gas emissions of an individual. Um, we all know already that greenhouse gas can cause a global warming. So may disadvantage ito. In New York, less polluted than yung area nila even though overcrowded ilang country but less polluted siya kasi bihira lang sa kanilang private vehicle kasi marami silang public transportation na maaaring sakyan. So, like in Asia, same in New York, Singapore, Japan, low lang ang kanilang carbon footprint. But we have to remember that not all cities dance as New York and Tokyo. Some cities like Los Angeles are urban sprawls with massive freeways that force residents to spend money on cars and gas. So unlike Los Angeles, they prefer use private vehicle, and if they have their own vehicle o sasakyan, every individual consume with the gas. Therefore, it can contribute a pollution. And the next is the urban areas consume most of the world's energy. So, huwag kayong mako-confuse between rural and urban. If we say urban, cities yan. If we say rural, probinsya o barrio. So, cities only cover 2% of the world's landmass, 'di ba? Napakaliit lang ng sakop ng mga cities kasi maliliit lang yung cities, but take note, they consume 78% of the global energy. Sila yung pinakamaliit lang, sila pa yung pinakamalaking na-consume pagdating sa global energy. Therefore, if carbon emissions must be cut to prevent global warming, this massive energy consumption in the cities must be curbed. But we have to remember also that these actions will require a lot of creativity. For example, they have a lot of food product na tina-travel from one place to another bago makarating sa major cities. Hindi naman ganon kabilis, hindi rin ganon kadali na i-deliver yung mga food product. So, ano ba ang mga transportasyon na ginagamit para ma-deliver itong mga food products sa lugar na dapat pagdadalhan? So, most of the time, they use buses, trains, or even airplanes. Then, ang nangyayari, nakakapag-consume na ito ng gas. So, therefore, nag-i-increase din ang carbon emissions. Why do we need a carbon emissions ban? Of course, they can contribute a pollution, climate change, and global warming. But carbon emissions from factories and automobiles are among the biggest contributors to the climate change and global warming. Ang mga emissions, nanggagaling ito sa pagsunog ng mga fossil fuels like coal, gasoline, oils, and many more. The next is the major terror attacks or recent years have also targeted cities. Cities, especially those with global influence, are obvious targets of the terrorists. So, for example, a 9/11 famous attack. So, which happened September 11, 2001. Kaya siya tinawag na 9/11. So, ito yung pagsabog sa World Trade Center ng mga teroristang Muslim. And also, in November 2015, inatake rin ang Paris by Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, which is ISIL or what we call ISIL.
So, global city and the poor. Massive inequality was very pronounced in the cities. Some large cities, particularly those in Scandinavia, have found ways to mitigate inequality through state-led social redistribution programs. Yet, many cities, particularly those in the developing countries, are sites of contradiction. So when we say Scandinavia, it is not referred to one country. It denotes the countries of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Although inequality exists in most of the cities, but the cities in Scandinavia, they implemented ways to at least minimize or lessen the inequality in their respective place. They implemented redistribution program. However, in many cities, particularly in those developing countries, are sites of contradiction. So, developing countries are those countries na hindi masyadong mayaman. We prefer to call them developing countries rather than underdeveloped because when we say underdeveloped, it is very negative to hear. Unlike developing, somehow there is a progress. In developing countries, inequality is very obvious. In places like Mumbai is in India, Jakarta of Indonesia, and Manila, Philippines. It is common to find gleaming buildings alongside our massive shanty towns. Okay, so when we say gleaming buildings, it is the modern glasses building structure. It is the sort where you can see yourself reflected when you peek. It is common in developing countries to see gleaming buildings, and the shanty towns are seen on the opposite side. So shanty towns are like what we call the squatter area. So, and you can already see that there is an equality. So merong mayayaman, meron ding mahihirap are most common in developing country, particularly in these mentioned places in Mumbai, Jakarta, and Manila. In most of the world's global cities, the middle class is also thinning out. Globalization creates high-income jobs that are concentrated in global cities. In places like New York, there are high-rolling American investment bankers whose children are raised by Filipino maids. So it is very common in global cities that they give high salary to the jobs that they offer. One of the examples of these are people from global cities or rich countries are getting people from developing countries to work for them. Just like us, some of the Filipinos went abroad to look for a job because we know that the other countries are offering more higher salary than here in the Philippines. And most of them are DH or domestic helpers. In the outskirts of New York and San Francisco are poor urban enclaves, occupied by African Americans and immigrant families who are often denied at a better life. Actually, these African and Americans are being forced to move further away from their city. As city attracts more capital and future residents, the price of goods are increasing, and the poor residents have no choice but to relocate and go far away to look for a place na cheaper ang prices ng mga bilihin. And this phenomenon is what we call gentrification. So the gentrification is a phenomenon of driving out the poor in favor of newer and wealthier residents. So Mas pinapaboran yung mas may mga kaya sa buhay, and that is the concept of gentrification.
So, in conclusion, global cities are sites and medium of globalization. Kumbaga, they serve as instruments sa globalization. They are therefore a material representations of the phenomenon. Through them, we see the best of globalization. They are places that creates exciting fusions of cultures and ideas. They are also places that generate tremendous wealth. Ug mao ni iyang positive sides. However, they remain sites of great inequality where global servants serve global entrepreneurs and most of niyang iyang disadvantage.